Hello YouTube, Mr. Mags here. One of my favorite things to do on this channel is make full teams for trainers throughout the entire Pokemon franchise. And one group of trainers that I've never really touched on this channel are the Frontier Brains from Emerald and Platinum. You do fight these trainers. A lot of the trainers that I do or characters that I do give teams to are people that you don't typically fight or you never fight with full teams. I wanted to give them, full team of six Pokemon. All of these Frontier Brains you do actually fight, but you never fight them in a situation where they have a full team of six. So I thought it'd be fun to go over every single one of these characters and give them full teams of six as if you were fighting them outside of the facility. So let's get right into the Hoenn Frontier Brains and starting off with the criteria for how I develop these teams. These Pokemon will be picked based on ones that fit this character's theme or personality, as well as any canon Pokemon from games, anime, manga, etc. And like I said, all these characters you do fight in their facilities, so most of them had a good amount of Pokemon to pick anyway. But I was allowed to get a little creative with some of the picks for reasons I'll get into in just a second. All Pokemon from Gens 1 through 3 are fair game. These battle facilities are post-game, you know, challenges where every single Pokemon up to that point is usable. So I think it's only fair to allow these trainers to use any Pokemon. However, all things equal, I did typically prioritize Gen 3 Pokemon where I felt it was where necessary. Um, if a trainer specifically used a bunch of non-Gen 3 Pokemon, I'll obviously go with those. But if I was allowed to pick, I try to make at least half their team Gen 3, just since they are in Hoenn, I feel they should represent the region as much as possible. But there are situations where I kind of did have to give them previous gen Pokemon, just because I felt that it fit them very well. However, I am not allowing any legendary or mythical Pokemon. Now, some legendary Pokemon are actually allowed in these battle facilities. Those like sub-legendaries with around 580 base stat total. A lot of them are allowed in these facilities. Stuff like Cresselia, the legendary birds, Heatran, Raikou and those those kinds of things. Latios and Latios, which I'm actually kind of surprised are even allowed. That tier of legendary, obviously not like Palkia or Kyogre, like box legendary tier Pokemon, but um these what they're considered sub legendaries are, and most of these factory heads are battle frontier brains do actually use these sub-legendary Pokemon. Not all of them do, and most of them only use one in their, or two, well, at least use some in their rematch fights after the, like, I guess, 49th uh, battle. However, I decided to do a thing where, since not all of them have legendary Pokemon, um, I just felt it would be more fair to just disqualify all legendary Pokemon and essentially replace those Pokemon with ones that are similar enough, either have a similar vibe, have at least one typing that's similar. For example, if they did have a Zapdos, I would replace it with a Kanto Pokemon that is a flying or an electric type Pokemon to kind of replace it. I'll touch on those on a case by case basis, but yeah, I just felt it was more fair and honestly more fun to create these teams if I wasn't allowing legendary Pokemon. These teams are created independent of any other canon trainer teams. So, since these are post-game fights, I'm saying it's fine if they use Pokemon that are aces of other trainers. So like Metagross, Gardevoir, Slaking, Salamence, etc. Even though these are Pokemon that are very clearly tied to other trainers in Emerald, they're allowed in this, on these teams. And just a little side quest of mine was to try to make these teams as good as possible. Obviously, I'm not including legendary Pokemon, but I still wanted to give, to give these trainers, if I am allowed to give them new Pokemon, give them Pokemon that I felt, rounded out the team in a fun way, or rooted out any like weaknesses the overall team had, or just synergized very well. These are intended to be like post-game super bosses. So ideally, a lot of these, won't have a lot of overlapping type weaknesses. Some of them will, just because that's just kind of how it shaked out. But I tried to make these, as good as possible without overlapping too many Pokemon, if any, as possible. So now, starting off with Salon Maiden Abel, who is Annabelle. Yeah, Annabelle. Sorry. Salon Maiden Annabelle, who is the head of the Battle Tower. And even though the Battle Tower existed in Ruby and Sapphire, she didn't show up until Emerald. That's something that's different with the Tower Tycoon in Diamond and Pearl. Palmer does show up in those games, and then that's expanded on. He does show up in Platinum as well. Um, but something that's kind of funny is that like in the Japanese version of the games, I believe she is still called the Tower Tycoon, or it more directly references the Battle Tower, but in English she's called the Salon Maiden. I'm not exactly sure why. I know there is an area in the Battle Tower in Emerald called the Battle Salon, which is like basically a waiting room. So I guess she's the maiden of just that part of it. I don't know, it's a little confusing, but I think that title fits her. Okay, so her team here is Snorlax. That kind of seems to be the Pokemon that they are pushing hard as her partner Pokemon. She has Snorlax in every single time you encounter her across the entire franchise. Um, most of these trainers will have at least one Pokemon that repeats on their silver and then uh, gold battle. So for her, Snorlax is the one that repeats. However, I personally just don't really feel like it fits her whole personality and vibe super well. Maybe it's just because in the anime, which is the only instance where I believe she doesn't have Snorlax, she exclusively used psychic Pokemon. So I wanted to emphasize her Alakazam a little more, which she does have in her initial teams, and again uses it in the anime. So generally, how I'm going to be structuring these teams, again, generally, it's not every time, but generally, the Pokemon at the front and the back of the party are kind of the ones that I think are like kind of represent the trainer the best. The one in the back is their ace. Well, one in the front is kind of their pseudo ace. So even though Snorlax is her what's it called? Like her partner Pokemon in Pokemon Masters. She uses both Snorlax and Alakazam in her fight in Sun and Moon. I personally just feel like Alakazam just fits what she's going for a little better. And then Misdreavus is a fun pick because in that Sun and Moon fight where she shows up during that Looker quest with the Ultra Beasts, she has a Mismagius. So I thought it'd be cool to give her a Misdreavus here. And then the other three are all references to legendary Pokemon that she would use in the Battle Tower fights. Magnetric is switched out from Raikou, Flareon is switched out from Entei, and then Altaria is switched out from Latias, I believe it's Latias, but is also kind of a reference to her Salamence that she has in in the Sun and Moon fights, but I gave Salamence to someone else because he actually had one on his team. So I think Altaria just kind of rounds out the team in a very nice way, I feel. But I could also hear arguments for Misdreavus maybe being feeling a little too weak for this tier of trainer. There will be a couple other questionable decisions that are canon Pokemon that they use, but this Mischievous was a made-up pick for her, at least her Emerald team. I also switched out for a different ghost type, that being Bayonet. It's much more physically, yeah, but physically focused and has an overall higher base stat total than Mischievous, but I think either could work. I also just wanted to make sure she had two teams, emphasize the fact that for whatever reason, Annabelle has two different sprites. Um, the Bulbapedia article was a little unclear about exactly why she has two sprites, something about the way the hardware displays the sprite is different depending on what exactly you're playing it on. I don't know if it was like the SP was different than the regular Game Boy Advance or like later versions of Emerald or like PAL region or something. I'm not exactly sure. I just know that there are two colorations of her sprite. The one that has Mischievous here is definitely closer to her actual coloring, but I kind of like this more vibrant purplish pink here. So yeah, I yeah, I like both teams quite a bit, honestly. Next, factory head, Nolan. Now, for both the uh, leaders of the Battle Factory in both Emerald and Platinum, I basically had free range to be 100% creative with what I gave them. Since they exclusively use rented Pokemon, there's no like set list of ones that only they can use. They have access to every single Pokemon that the facility offers. So for him, I actually created a bunch of different teams, kind of representing a bunch of different factors of him as a trainer and just different strategies and different things that I thought would be cool to build teams around. I'm not going to build a bunch of different teams for every single trainer. Obviously, I've already made two for Ambell and I'm going to make three for Nolan. Not all of them will have multiple, but if I, you know, if I had enough ammo to make multiple teams, you know, I think it's only fair to, to theorize multiple teams if I thought it was worth it. So this first one here, I thought it'll be very fun for all three of these teams to have it where I have two from Gen 1, two from Gen 2, and two from Gen 3. I don't know, I just thought since he has access to any Pokemon from all gens, represent all gens equally. I thought that was cool. And for this one specifically, I thought it would be even cooler to like on top of having that, that structure, also have it where half the team is very physically offensive, or the other half is very specially offensive. So you have Aerodactyl and Magmar, both from Gen 1, Ursaring and Kingdra from Gen 2, and Hariyama and Sceptile from Gen 3. But if you go across the top, Aerodactyl, Ursaring, Hariyama are all physically have are much more higher physical attack, and Magmar, Kingdra, and Sceptile have much higher special attack, or at least make more sense to run specially. Uh, Kingdra has even attacking stats, but especially in Emerald, it just makes more sense since all water and dragon moves are special. You know, Dragon Breath and Surf, Ice Beam, even like he could build up his physical attack with Dragon Dance and stuff like that, but I feel like he makes more sense as a special attacker. So yeah, that's the first team I created. I really do dig this team. But the second one, I actually kind of like even more. This one has a lot going on, and I'm actually kind of proud of all that happened here. So the two that are from Kanto are Pinsir and Machamp. Those are just two, pretty strong physical attackers from the region. Um, the two from Johto are Donphan and Scizor. Again, two very, solid physical attackers from the region. And then Ninjask, I kind of want to be here as specifically one to help baton pass around just a bunch of different good stat boosts. Obviously, it sets up speed boosters by existing, but also can set up Swords Dance. They can set up Substitute or Double Team. it doesn't even really need to attack. It can just be a support Pokemon. And then Scizor can also use Baton Pass. It can even set up Swords Dance itself and Agility even. So yeah, those two exist on this team to just pass around these boosts to the other members of the team. And Walrein, even though it, on paper maybe should be a special attacker since all water and ice moves are special, it can still know stuff like Body Slam and Earthquake. So I still think if it does want to pass those boosts to Walrein, it can still benefit uh, from those stat increases. But on top of just the fun thing with baton passing, the reason there are three bug types here is for whatever reason, his sync, that's what they call sync pairs. His sync pair Pokemon in Masters EX are a Mega Pinsir and a Ninjask. Of all the Pokemon you could give him, I don't know why his sync pairs are two bug flying types. Obviously, this Pinsir can't be flying, but still two bug types. I don't really understand that, but at the same time, I like something in my brain kind of likes him having bug types. So I also threw in Scizor here, and then Donphan and Walrein can help mitigate the fire weakness that the team as a whole had. And Machamp is there just because I like Machamp, and I think it should be somewhere in this presentation, so I threw it here. And Walrein is here specifically. This could have been another Pokemon that was clearly more physically built, but I wanted him to have Walrein and by extension, kind of Aerodactyl as well, to both of them kind of together reference the Articuno he uses in the anime. Uh, I don't know if it's something that if he like borrowed from the facility, or if it actually is his, or if he was just temporarily using it for whatever reason. But in the anime, when Ash fought him with his Charizard, Nolan had an Articuno. So I wanted him to have a strong flying type from Gen 1, that being Aerodactyl, and also just a good ice type in Walrein. So yeah, I just like both these teams quite a bit. But I wanted to kind of see if I could extrapolate even more about and like see if there were any other Pokemon that were even more closely tied to just him. I like that I was able you know, to directly reference Pokemon he's used in the past with Pinsir, Ninjask, and Articuno. But doing a little more digging, I was able to find a good amount of other Pokemon that still fit my criteria of having two from each region that he actually at least cares for in the anime or other means. So this team here, um, there's some I couldn't even get a picture of this. It was just referenced on Bulbapedia, but I'm rolling with it. There is some promotional material out there that shows him with an Electabuzz, a Steelix, and a Typhlosion. Sure, why not? Those are three random Pokemon that the facility has, so yeah, he should use them. And then the other three Pokemon are all ones in the anime that it was shown that the battle facility has. Again, I don't know if he personally takes care of them, but they're ones that, he is shown at least around and having access to. So Golduck, Camerupt, and Flygon. Now, this team does have an absolutely massive ground weakness. I completely understand that. Um, but that's why I threw Golduck on here. And even though there are three ground types, Flygon doesn't actually share any weaknesses with Camerupt or Steelix. It's obviously immune to ground. Its only weaknesses are, I believe, ice and dragon in this generation. So it's not weak to water like Camerupt and Steelix are. And so I don't know. I just kind of like that, even though there are a bunch of ground types, there aren't like a ton of weaknesses that are between them. Steelix and Camera are both weak to water, and ground, but that's a different thing. That's because they're secondary typings. But yeah, I still think this team kind of does synergize pretty well. I think my favorite of the three teams is this one here with the Walrein. Um, but this one up top, I also just really, really like how I was able to represent just a bunch of different ways the battle facility could be used. All right, moving on to Arena Tycoon Greta. Now, the battle arena is probably the one that I've used the absolute least. Throughout all my time of playing Emerald, I definitely focused more on the battle factory and the battle dome. Yeah. Uh the arena, it just kind of, I don't know. I never really understood it. Like I know there are a bunch of rules. I know like there's a point system and it like takes into account how much you actually attack as opposed to big status moves and how much HP you still have. It just never really seemed nearly as fun as the other facilities. I honestly think there are two facilities on here that if you took away, no one would like really care. I'll get the other one in just a second, but this one is definitely the one that I personally didn't put as much time into as the other ones. But, you know, I still think the team that she has is a at least a very interesting one. It was definitely the one that after putting it all together, I was like, that's definitely um probably the most unique team. Definitely the one that I feel doesn't fit her the most as a trainer, but like, sure, I'll do it. Why not? So Greta, in all of her fights, she uses Umbreon. Like I said up top, the vast majority of these trainers will have a Pokemon that is on both of their teams, and for her, it's Umbreon. Again, I don't really necessarily feel like Umbreon fits her super well, kind of like Snorlax, but I don't know. I just feel like in this instance, it worked well for the layout for Umbreon to be her ace. So I'll give it to her. But in those fights, across all of those, she does also use Heracross, Breloom, Shedinja, which is a very interesting choice considering the way the facility works. I don't know exactly how it calculates always having 1 HP. That I'm not really sure. But and then also Gengar. Again, like two ghost types, two fighting types, and a dark type. It just seemed like a weird hodgepodge of just a bunch of stuff going on. And I feel like the moves that they're given aren't really don't really work well with the facility because I'm pretty sure Heracross knows Endure, and that move is like gives you negative points. I think Breloom knows protect. One of them knows Protect, and like a couple of other status moves again also dock you points in this facility. So I don't know exactly what they're going for with this, but regardless, um, I'm also giving her Medicham from the anime, which gun to my head, I would have assumed Medicham was always on her team. It just feels like something that would fit her vibe super well. I don't know, it just like I don't know, it just feels like something that she would have. In the anime, she also had a Hariyama, but between the two, I feel like Medicham just fits her better. Plus, I gave Hariyama to one of Nolan's teams, and I think that it works there as well. Um, so yeah, I dig this team. I like that she has three Pokemon that are fighting type. Again, I just feel like her uh her design just evokes the feelings of a fighting trainer to me. Um, like I sure you can have two other ghost types, but I don't know. It just seems a little a little not really her speed to have those ghost types, even Umbreon to an extent. But I think the team overall, like at least the top half fits her pretty well, and the bottom half, I could kind of go one way or the other about those. But for any of these, please let me know down below what you think about any of these teams. Is there anything that you would, do differently for her specifically? You know, even though those five are Hurricane and Pokemon, are there any that you think don't fit here, or are there any others that you think should be here instead? Yeah, please let me know all that down below. Now, Dome Ace Tucker. Like I said, this is probably the facility in Emerald that I did the second most. I was massively obsessed with the Battle Factory, but the Battle Dome, I also really, really liked the like tournament style thing they had going on. I really liked how you're able to see what Pokemon your opponent might use and pick accordingly. They're only going to use two out of the three shown, but you can pick two based on what you think they might use. I just really, really like that concept. And Tucker, um, the team I ended up giving him is probably the single strongest team. I might say the single strongest team I have ever given in my entire channel. Like genuinely, any as far as like teams that aren't allowed to use legendaries, this might be the single best team, and the vast majority of the picks here were ones that he canonically uses. So the team I picked for him are the ones that he actually uses across his teams, being Salamence, Metagross, Charizard, and Swampert. Crazy. And then Gardevoir, which replaces a Latios, I believe it's Latios on his rematch team. And then since he uses Swampert on both teams, there is another one I have to pick here, and I went with Meganium. Since he already used a water and a fire starter, I thought it's only fair to use the grass starter from the region that wasn't represented here. So now he has a fire, grass, water from all three regions. Yeah, I like this team a lot. I feel like Gardevoir just fits his whole thing very well. I don't know why they spent both Salamence and Metagross on him. He's cool. Like I said, I really like the battle arena, but I don't really know why these two pseudo legendary Pokemon are both used on him. Like in my head, I always assumed that Metagross was on Annabelle's team, but nope, that was only in the anime. Um, in the anime, he also used an Arcanine instead of a Charizard, and that would arguably be even better since Arcanine has a higher base stat total. But I'm prioritizing the games here, and I think him having three starters just, I don't know, that just feels right given the rest of the team. So yeah, this genuinely might have one of the single highest base stat total averages of any team I will ever create, and it just feels right for him. Next, Pike Queen Lucy. The Battle Pike is another one that I frequented, not as much as the factory or the dome or even the tower to an extent, but like I really liked the adventure you have to go on to get to her. I think it's overall, I know it is different, but it's kind of similar to the Battle Pyramid, and I think uh this does that concept a little better. And yeah, it being shaped like a Seviper and her looking like that, I think, it's only fair that I keep her Seviper that she uses in every team as her ace, and then fill out the rest of her team with either Pokemon that she actually uses or other Pokemon that are like serpentine enough, or at least Pokemon that have that like snake guy as their shape indicator, because every Pokemon has a little shape indicator for some reason. I don't really know exactly what that's used for, but all these Pokemon have that little amorphous shape, snake shape guy as their icon. So Milotic, Shuckle, Steelix, and Seviper are all on her actual teams. And then Gyarados felt like an obvious one to put there is between Gyarados and Arbok. And I felt like Arbok would be stepping on Seviper's toes even, a little too much. And because Milotic isn't her actual ace, I didn't feel bad about kind of doubling up on its thing. Um, Plus, I'd rather her have two water types since half her team is mad weak to ground. So I didn't want another poison type to now make four of her Pokemon weak to ground. So having two water types helps with that. And I feel like Magcargo is as snake-like as Shuckle is. They're both like kind of snail-inspired things. I know Shuckle is like a barnacle and a couple other things that are inspiring it, but I think Magcargo is close enough. There might be one or two other snake Pokemon out there I forgot about. Again, please let me know down below if you can think of anything. Obviously, if this were in a later generation, she would have stuff like Superior, Sandaconda, even like there are other snake ones now, but at the time, I feel like Shuckle and Magcargo are probably the closest thing to other snakes that, like, I guess Gorbis and Huntail, but again, I didn't want to like fill her team with a bunch of water types and then just Steelix and Viper. I feel that would be, kind of overcorrecting a different way. Now it's mostly weak to electric. So yeah, these like Mech Cargo isn't the best, but I still feel like, you know, it fits her pretty well. Now, Palace Maven Spencer. Um, yeah, the Battle Palace is the other one I was kind of getting at where I very rarely did this one. I probably did it more than the Battle Arena, but I just didn't think this one was fun. At least the Battle Arena, like, at least it has like more understandable mechanics that you can actually more or less control. There's still obviously a lot of luck involved, but I think it's at least a little more fair. Whereas the Palace, um, the fact that every single Pokemon that you use, like they're acting as if they are a trade Pokemon and you don't have enough badges to control them yet. So they never follow your orders. They may just completely not attack. They might loaf around. I don't know if they go as far as like to confuse themselves or put themselves to sleep like those trade Pokemon can do, but I know for a fact they'll almost never use the move that you want them to use. So I just personally never found that very fun. If you found it fun, I respect that quite a bit, but I personally just never really liked it. Um, Even though Spencer does have this Kyogre aesthetic, I don't really know exactly why he does. Obviously, I couldn't give him a Kyogre on his team, but I still think the team I made for him is pretty solid. So the ones he does actually use in his battles that aren't legendaries are Lapras, Arcanine, Crobat, and Slacking. And then I believe he also uses Suicune. Yeah, that's the other one because he uses Slacking on both teams and maybe something else as well. I could be misremembering, but I know he uses a Suicune. But I felt like since Lapras was here, it wasn't necessary to like substitute a different water type there. So I went with two Pokemon that he used in the anime that I think fit him very well, that being Claydol and Shiftry. That also allowed him to have half his team being from Gen 3, and I'd like to prioritize that where possible. So yeah, I think this team is overall pretty solid. Crobat, I feel it doesn't really fit him super well. I dig the other five on here. Crobat is obviously one from his actual teams, but I don't know. I just don't really feel like it fits with him, but maybe I'm just not seeing the vision there. But I don't know. I still think it's a very good Pokemon. It's a very high base stat total Pokemon. It can do a lot of things that the rest of the team can't really do. But I don't know, just vibe wise, it kind of sticks out a little bit to me. But an alternative to Claydol and Shiftry are two Pokemon that he just kind of inexplicably has with him in the palace. They're just kind of around. He has an Azurill and a Dusclops just kind of with him. He doesn't actually use them, but they are with him. So I thought it'd be cool if in a version of this fight he actually does use those Pokemon. So I gave him a Azumarill, who is actually kind of a direct substitute for Suicune, with it being a water type, and then Dusclops, who I think may even fit him overall better than Claydol or Shiftry did anyway. So yeah, I like both these teams quite a bit. And lastly, for Emerald, we have Pyramid King Brandon. The Battle Pyramid is also one that I don't know, I just never really enjoyed it a lot. Like I enjoyed it more than the the Palace or the Arena, but I between this and the Pike, I prefer the Pike. I just felt like it was just a little more manageable and just a little more varied. Um, you know, Having to go around the go around like different floors. fighting off wild Pokemon and fighting or getting items as you go. Like that's a lot of fun. I dig the idea behind it. I just feel like it was executed in a way that I personally just didn't really appeal to me all that well. Um, but still, his teams are crazy. I know I said up top that most of these trainers use one or two legendaries on their teams, across their teams, but for whatever reason, for him specifically, they decided to just make both his teams full of legendaries. In the initial fight, he uses the three Reggies: Regirock, Regice, Registeel. That's crazy. Okay, like I kind of get it to an extent, like the pyramid, like I feel like I can see the connection between that and the like rock tombs that they're in, around the region. Like I can see the vision there. But then why does he have the three legendary birds on his on his rematch team? That seemed a little crazy. So, um like I said, I'm not actually giving him those Pokemon, but I did find some pretty decent analogs for those Pokemon. So instead of Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, I gave him Dugong, Jolteon, Ninetales. Ideally, this would have been a team of all pure type Pokemon. Or again, ideally, it would have been a bunch of it would have been exact replicants where it would be like an ice flying, an ice electric, or an ice flying, electric flying, fire flying. I could have given him Charizard instead of Ninetales, but I already given Charizard to someone else, and I just feel like Ninetales. I don't know. I just feel like it works here. Um, there wasn't a single pure ice type, I think, until Glalie. I think Glalie may actually be the first pure ice type because I know there wasn't one in Gen 1, and yeah, I know there wasn't one in Gen 2 either. So I had to go with a different ice type from Kanto, and I went with Dugong. I don't know. I feel like it works well since a good portion of the rest of the team is weak to ground. Dugong having, being able to attack ground on both sides of it, I think that works here. And then instead of the Reggies, I gave them Solrock, Glalie, Aggron. Ideally, Aggron would actually be a Metagross since Aggron's rock typing does overlap with Solrock, and I didn't really love that exactly, but I already given Metagross to someone else, and I would like for these teams to be as diverse as possible. But yeah, I also wish there was a slightly better rock type in the region. Like I guess you could do Armaldo or Cradily, but I don't know. Does something about Solrock fit the pyramid aesthetic a little better to me? And then Glalie being a pure ice type does mirror Regice perfectly. But um, you could argue that maybe Nosepass and Mawile would be technically better counterparts since at least in Gen 3, all three of these are pure their type. So they'd be a perfect analog for Regirock, Regice, Registeel. I should also say that all of these Pokemon that all eight of these Pokemon here are all Pokemon that are found at some point in the battle pyramid. Um, there were actually a good amount of electric types I could have picked from. I could have picked Electabuzz, Raichu, etc. Again, same thing with fire and ice even, but these are the ones that I felt just fit together on a team the best, I feel. So yeah, like I said, please let me know down below what you thought about any of those teams. Um, are there any just glaring omissions? Are there any like major type overlaps or type weaknesses that I overlooked that you think could have been ironed out a little better? Because like I said, I would like for these teams to be as good as possible. Um, and this team is definitely a little underwhelming, but the Agron team is a little better. So yeah, let me know down below kind of what you thought about any of these teams before we move on to Sinnoh. And the criteria is basically identical. The only difference is now gens 1 through 4 are all fair game, with the exact same stipulation that no legendary Pokemon are used. There are fewer legendary Pokemon, I believe, from memory used. in this region, but I'm still trying to, you know, in any instance where a legendary Pokemon could be used, I still wanted to have an essentially an equivalent replacement. And same thing here, like if I want to give someone a Garchomp or a Gallade or or something like that, that's fine since these are very much so post game super bosses. All right, starting off with Tower Tycoon Palmer. Now, he is one that uses legendary Pokemon. In his rematch fight, he uses Regigigas, Cresselia, and Heatran. That's crazy. I do think Regigigas fits him very well, but I really did like the team. I think the ones that I picked for him are a very nice substitute. So, uh, I really, really like him having Snorlax as a replacement for Regigigas, just because they're both very physically offensive, very bulky, relatively to an extent slow, uh, normal type Pokemon, but also I like him having Snorlax as a direct parallel to his son Barry, who uses a Snorlax. I think that parallel is very fun. Bronzong, I think, is a pretty good parallel to Cresselia, and then Magmortar I think, is a pretty solid substitute for Heatran. And then I don't necessarily love his initial team. Dragonite and Milotic seem a little random. Like they're not bad picks. They're obviously both incredibly powerful Pokemon. Dragonite being just one of the strongest physical attackers available, and then Milotic being very hard to take down. Water just you know is just a very hard type to take down, and it's incredibly bulky. I think in Platinum it actually is a rest sleep talk set. So like if you do whittle it down with whatever status or just are able to whittle it down, it can just rest right back up. So if you're not if you're not really prepared to take these out, you don't really stand a chance. And then he also has Rhyperior, which yeah, I think Rhyperior fits him very well, especially in Diamond and Pearl, where Bertha didn't actually use one. Her ace was Hippowdon, so Rhyperior being up for grabs I think fits him very well. But that's also kind of why I don't love Milotic on his team, since that was used on Cynthia's team. Although I also don't really agree with her using Milotic either. I've said before that I felt of the ones on her team that felt the most out of place. There isn't really a water type in the region that I think would fit, but like I don't know. I just feel like Milotic doesn't really fit perfectly on either team, but it is here, and they are dead set on him using these three Pokemon in every instance of him showing up in the manga and uh, even the and every iteration of fighting him, he uses Milotic. So yeah, I'll give it to him. Next, Factory Head Thornton. Now, this is another instance where I had complete free reign to make whatever team I wanted. But I did decide to go with a slightly different approach from the various teams I gave to Noland. For whatever reason, maybe it's just the coloring, maybe the hair kind of reminds me of this, but I personally have always heavily associated him with Roserade. Uh, Maybe it's just, Thornton sounds kind of like Thorn, and Roserade has, thorns. So I don't know. I hope you can see the connection there. He is green. I feel his hair is similar. So from that, I also, I was like, what theme can I kind of like? Do I do the same thing where it's two from various regions, or do I do a thing where I take the fact that Roserade is an evolution of a previous gen Pokemon and just make a team based on that? And I like that idea quite a bit. So the first team here, again, all Pokemon that are evolutions of previous gen Pokemon. We have Porygon Z, which I think fits the Battle Factory and his like very analytic vibe very, very nicely. Frostlass, Electivire, Probopass, Honchkrow, Roserade. Fantastic team. Um, I yeah, I just I don't know. I just really like this grouping of Pokemon for him. I just think all these, like every single one, just feels a very different niche, and they can all. Uh, you can even do a thing where Frostlass either has Destiny Bond and or Sheer Cold, so it can just be annoying that way. Roserade could be one of the annoying like staples in the factory where it could be a double team leech seed set. Electroware could be a mixed attacker. Probopass can have like the elemental punches and then some steel move or something. The various quirks of the battle of this battle facility, I think could be on very much so on display here. But after doing a little more digging, I actually did realize that his sync pair like one of his sync pairs in Masters EX is a Magnezone. He also has a Bronzong, and I decided to ignore that. I would use Bronzong somewhere else, and Bronzong doesn't, fit with what I'm doing here. So I decided to make another team with Magnezone as his ace. So I have Tangrowth, Ambipom, Gliscor, Weavile, Yanmega, and Magnezone. This team is very weak to fire. There wasn't much I could do because like between all eight of these Pokemon, uh, what is that? Six of them are weak to fire. So at best, both will be half weak. You know, you do have Gliscor who at least can help mitigate that. So it is what it is. But yeah, I really like Yan Mega with him as well. There was a version of these teams that had Roserade and Yan Mega on the same team, and I think those two together, along with Porygon Z, fit him very well. But I also like Porygon, or I like Yan Mega and Magnezone together. So between both of these teams, I like the one with Roserade as his ace a little better, but Magnezone also does just, I think, fit him very nicely. Next up, Arcade Star Dahlia. This is probably the one that I spend the second most time in. Obviously, once again, the Battle Factory, I spent possibly thousands of hours in the Battle Factory in just Platinum and Heart Gold. Like uh, I would argue, I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of my time spent in Heart Gold was in the Battle Factory. But outside of that, I think the Battle Arcade is probably the one that I spent the second most time in. And I really, really like the gameplay loop here as well. You go in without any items, but you're playing this little roulette game where you're able to either put statuses on yourself if you pick badly, or to the opponent if you uh, pick well. Same thing with items. You can give yourself or your opponent items. You can either increase or decrease levels. You can add various like fog or trick room or other little elements like that to the battle, and I really like that. So her team, I only had to switch out one Pokemon here since instead of Zapdos on her second team, I gave her a Luxray. Just normally I would do that with a Gen 1 Pokemon as the exchange there, but since I want her team to have at least three from Sinnoh, I thought I hadn't used Luxray yet, and I think Luxray just aesthetically fits her very well, so I went with Luxray. So on her initial team, she uses Dusknoir, Medicham, Ludicolo, and in Masters EX, Ludicolo is her actual sync pair. But again, I wanted to kind of emphasize the region she's actually from when possible. So Dusknoir is at the front there. And then in her second fight, she has Blaziken, again, Zapdos, but instead I have Lux right here, and Togekiss. And I don't know, I feel like Togekiss is another one that just fits her very well. I can't really exactly explain why. I just feel like I don't know. She just gives the aesthetic of possibly in a different reality where fairy existed in Sinnoh and she were a gym leader. I feel like she could work as a fairy gym leader. So I think Togekiss works as a race. Next up, the Battle Castle with Castle Valet Derek. Now, of the Platinum facilities, the Battle Castle is probably the one I spent the least amount of time in. I wouldn't say that any of the facilities are actively bad or annoying, like I was kind of saying about the arena and the palace in Emerald, but this is probably the one that I don't know, it just was the least interesting to me. I did like the idea of winning points based on how well you did in the battle and you're able to use those points to either heal your Pokemon or give your Pokemon items and that kind of thing. I do like that idea. It's kind of like a I feel like it's a kind of amalgamation of a lot of the ideas from the arena and the palace and the pike from Emerald and kind of put together in a more cohesive way. I dig it. It just for me, I just prefer spending my time elsewhere, but I still did enjoy my time with it. But for his teams, what they want to mention first is that when you fight him, Caitlyn is a part of his sprite. And as you may or may not know, this is actually the same Caitlyn that goes on to be an Elite Four member in Unova. As far as I know, that's one of the very few times where a gym leader or a even minor character like this ever goes to a different region to become a major trainer in that region. I can't think of any other examples. Please let me know down below if any come to mind. But I think that's pretty cool. I kind of wish, you know, these games did that more often. Especially surprising considering the Unova games were intended to be kind of like a reboot of the franchise, but they still had this random side character from an optional area in Platinum move on to be an Elite Four member in a different region. I think that's really cool. And if I did allow myself to use future gen Pokemon, I would have put Musharna or Gothitelle here to directly reference that, but I decided to go a slightly different direction, but we'll get there in just a second. So on Derek's initial team, he uses Staraptor, Houndoom, and Empoleon. And I think that's fair considering he literally looks like an Empoleon. That's cool. And then in his second team, he uses Gallade, Empoleon, and Entei. Well, since he already had Houndoom as a good fire type here, I didn't feel it necessary to switch it out for a different fire type. So I instead decided to use the other two slots to kind of reference Caitlyn specifically. And I personally have always kind of felt like she looks like a Lopunny. I don't know if that's intentional. Maybe it's just because he looks so much like an Empoleon. Maybe my brain is just trying to find a pattern of her looking like a different Pokemon. And I guess closer to Veneri technically, but still, I still just kind of feel like that might be what they're going for. But regardless, I hadn't used Lopunny anywhere else, and I think Empoleon and Lopunny together look enough like them two together to warrant that parallel. And then with Metagross here, this is a direct reference to Caitlyn's teams in Unova because for whatever reason, um, even though she is the Unova Elite Four member from the Sinnoh region in her rematch teams in Black and White, and then on her challenge mode teams in Black and White 2, she uses a Metagross as her ace Pokemon. Not any psychic types from Unova or even Sinnoh. I think her using Gallade would have been a fun reference to to Derek, but or to her time in Sinnoh, but no, Metagross. I don't know. It's just a little odd. I don't really know exactly why. Um, but regardless, she did use one, so Metagross here makes sense. And lastly, Hall Matron Argenta. The Battle Hall is another one that I spend a pretty good amount of time in, not as much as the arcade, but I still really like the idea here where it's all 1v1 fights and essentially it's a little complicated about exactly how it works, but I know you pick a type of Pokemon you want to fight, and if you pick the same type over and over and over again, the levels of that Pokemon, of the Pokemon you fight, will continually increase. But if you spread out, if you go like electric and then fire and then ice and then dark, their levels will stay relatively the same. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what level, if Argenta's level is like relative to that, or if she's always level 50. I don't remember exactly. Um, but regardless, I think that's very fun. You can either, test your luck against a bunch of Pokemon that you know you can beat, or you can spread it out and, you'll over time build up those squares, but at least starting out, they'll be a little easier. So I really dig that. However, she is another one that doesn't actually ever have any consistent teams, as far as I could tell. She also just uses stuff based on some maybe formula of, I don't, again, I, if someone has any like a better explanation as to why she picks the Pokemon she does, please let me know. Um, Unless I'm just completely missing something, and she does actually have a set team. But regardless, uh, from what I understand, she doesn't have any kind of set team. So I would had free reign to create my own teams. And I did decide to do something similar to how I did Noland in the first Battle Factory, and have her basically use two Pokemon from Kanto, one from one from Johto, one from Hoenn, and then two from Sinnoh, just to, I don't know, just to kind of represent everything pretty well. And uh the only thing I had to go off of was her sync pair Pokemon in Masters EX is a Skarmory for some reason. It fits her fine enough. It just is like a kind of very random choice. And then in the manga, she uses a Dragonite. So yeah, that's all I had to go off of. So the first team, which is the Skarmory team, we have Vaporeon, Exeggutor, Skarmory, Exploud, Drapion, and Mamoswine. There was no real like there wasn't like a reason why these specific Pokemon, fit her necessarily. I feel like Drapion, Exploud kind of um, you know, fit her coloration pretty at least kind of closely. For some reason, Mamoswine just stuck up to me as a good ace for her. I don't know exactly why. And I hadn't used a Porygon yet, even though I'd used most of the other evolutions. And then Exeggutor, I don't know, just another strong Kanto Pokemon to help round out the team. I think this team is pretty good. Although I do also really like this other team I made her with Jinx, Dragonite, Granbull, Sharpedo, Miss Magius, and Torterra. Again, for some reason, I guess I just feel like a ground type works as her ace. I don't know, I use Empoleon in another place, and I didn't use Infernape, but I use Blaziken, so that's fine. But again, Jinx, Granbull, and Magius. Again, all three of them just kind of, I think, fit her aesthetically very well. Uh, Dragonite is one of the only other few Pokemon that she has actually used, and Sharpedo, kind of like Exploud, is just a Pokemon from Hoenn I hadn't used yet, and I just for some reason feel like it works here. So yeah. Uh Again, with her and the factory heads, for them specifically, if there are any Pokemon that you think just, stand out to you as fitting them that I didn't use, please let me know. Because, these could have been literally any six Pokemon. And these are just 12 Pokemon that I think either, she has used canonically, or I feel fit her for kind of arbitrary reasons. So, do you have any other suggestions? Please let me know. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, please let me know down below what you thought about any of these teams. Do you agree or disagree with any of my, brief analysis of these facilities? I didn't like go as in depth into the ones that I feel are fairly straightforward, like the factory and the tower. The tower I feel is very straightforward in the factory since you're renting stuff. It just, I didn't feel like it was necessary to like go as in depth in my in my explanation for those. But if I got any of the explanations for, for the pyramid or the arena or whatever wrong, again, please let me know. I didn't do those nearly as much. But yeah, I had a ton of fun making these teams for these trainers. If there are any other like groups of trainers or characters that you would want me to make teams for in the future, please let me know all that down below as well as any other video ideas that or any of the recommendations you have for me. I'd like to, have conversations about all that stuff in the comments. And with that, I will see you all next time.